cowboy gave his only horse to a wounded Apache woman. What she offered him was beyond imagination. The cowboy had been traveling for what felt like days, the sun high above and the wind biting at his skin. His journey through the harsh desert landscape seemed endless. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the steady thud of his horse's hooves against the dry earth. He had been alone for a long time now, with nothing but the vast empty land to keep him company. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, shading his face from the scorching heat, and his coat flapped in the wind. His horse, a loyal and steady creature, had carried him across countless miles, always faithful. It had been his constant companion, a partner in the solitude that came with life on the road. But as he moved forward, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. The desert seemed quieter, as if it were holding its breath. He stopped for a moment, pulling the reins of his horse to bring it to a halt. There was nothing but the sound of the wind and the dry creak of the saddle. The horizon stretched out before him, empty and unforgiving. Then, a faint sound reached his ears, something he almost missed at first. A soft, weak cry, barely audible above the desert winds. The cowboy's instincts kicked in immediately. He scanned the horizon, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of life. There, just at the edge of his vision, he saw something, a figure, lying in the dirt, unmoving. Without thinking, he urged his horse forward, the animal trotting at a steady pace toward the distant figure. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her face dirty and pale, and she was clearly struggling to stay conscious. The cowboy's heart sank. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The woman was sprawled out on the desert floor, her face twisted in pain, her hair was matted with sweat and dirt, and she was clutching her side as if she were trying to stop the bleeding. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. She was injured. Badly. He knelt beside her, his hand gently reaching out to touch her shoulder. She flinched at first, her eyes snapping open, but when she saw him, her expression softened just slightly. She was Apache. Her features were sharp and beautiful, but there was a fierceness in her eyes that the cowboy recognized instantly. Hey, easy there, he said, his voice gruff but kind. You're safe now. The woman's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but all that came out was a weak gasp. Her breath was shallow, and the cowboy could see the pain in her eyes. She was on the edge of collapse. Without a second thought, he reached for his canteen, unscrewing the cap and bringing it to her lips. She took a sip, the water barely enough to quench her thirst. Her eyes fluttered, and for a moment it seemed like she might slip into unconsciousness. The cowboy couldn't just leave her there. He had to help. But what could he do? He had no supplies to treat her wounds, and he was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was miles away. He glanced down at his horse, then back at the woman. She needed help, and there was no time to waste. Hold on, he muttered, more to himself than to her. He grabbed his bandana and tied it around her wound as best as he could. The woman winced, but she didn't protest. There was something about her quiet strength that impressed him. Even in her state, she didn't cry out. Come on now, he said, his voice low and reassuring. He helped her sit up, his hand strong but gentle. He offered her his shoulder to lean on, supporting her as she tried to steady herself. I can't leave you here! Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The cowboy could see the conflict in her gaze, the hesitation, the distrust. She was Apache, and he was a stranger. He wasn't sure what kind of trouble he might be walking into, but he couldn't bring himself to turn away from someone in need. With great effort, she tried to speak. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. You don't have to help me, she said. Her words were slow, as if she were struggling to form them. I'm not your enemy. The cowboy frowned but didn't say anything. Instead, he helped her to her feet, his grip firm and steady.
I don't care who you are, he said, his voice calm but resolute. You're hurt, and I'm not leaving you to die out here.
We'll figure the rest out later. He looked at his horse again. It was his only means of survival in this vast desert, but he couldn't let this woman die because of his own fear. He needed to make a choice. With a sigh, he turned back to the woman. "I'm giving you my horse," he said, his voice steady, though his heart weighed heavy. "You need it more than I do." She shook her head, her eyes wide in disbelief. "No," she protested weakly. "You can't! You'll be stranded out here!" The cowboy just shook his head, his jaw set. "I can survive, but you need to get out of here." The woman's eyes softened, a quiet gratitude shining through the pain. She reached out and took his hand, her grip weak but earnest. "Thank you," she whispered. I won't forget this." He helped her onto his horse, guiding the animal carefully as she mounted it, still weak and unsteady. He looked at her once more, then turned, his boots crunching in the sand as he began to walk away. As he walked off, the cowboy glanced back over his shoulder at the woman. She had begun to ride away, her silhouette small against the vast expanse of the desert. For a moment, he almost regretted his decision. He had given away his only horse, the one thing that had kept him going all this time, but as he watched her disappear into the distance, something told him that this was the right thing to do. The desert was unforgiving, but it had also given him a chance to do something good. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough to carry him through whatever came next. The cowboy stood alone in the hot desert, watching the dust swirl in the dry wind. His horse was gone, taken by the wounded Apache woman he had helped just hours earlier. As the sun beat down upon him, the heat seemed to weigh heavier than ever. He hadn't fully understood the gravity of his decision until now. Without his horse, he was truly stranded in the middle of nowhere. His mind raced as he walked, each step kicking up the dust beneath his boots. He had been traveling for so long that the idea of being without his trusted companion was almost unimaginable, but it was too late now. He couldn't take back the choice he had made. He glanced at the horizon, seeing nothing but a vast expanse of sand and rock. There was no sign of any town or settlement nearby. He had always been able to rely on his horse to carry him to the next place, the next opportunity. Now he had to rely on his own strength, his own will. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his isolation. He was far from the world he once knew, alone in a harsh land with nothing but the endless desert stretching before him. His thoughts drifted back to the Apache woman. Her name still hadn't been spoken aloud, but he could still see her face in his mind, the pain in her eyes, the silent gratitude she had shown him. Her eyes had held something deeper, something he couldn't quite understand. Perhaps it was the bond of survival, the shared understanding that sometimes you help others because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect anything in return. The cowboy had done the right thing, but that didn't make the situation any easier. He could feel the sting of the sun growing more intense as the day wore on. He needed to find shelter before the heat became unbearable. But even as he thought about his own survival, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman. Why had she been out there in the first place? What had brought her to such a desperate state? It wasn't just the wound she had suffered. It was the look in her eyes, the quiet strength that seemed to flow beneath the surface. She had been no ordinary person. That much was clear. The cowboy continued walking, each step slower than the last. He wasn't sure where he was headed, but he knew he needed to find some kind of shade or shelter before the sun became too much to handle. His skin was already beginning to burn, and his throat felt dry despite the small amount of water he had left. As he moved on, he heard a sound in the distance. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it caught his attention. His head snapped up, his eyes scanning the horizon. He thought he saw a figure in the distance, but it was too far away to be sure. He didn't hesitate. The cowboy instinctively began moving toward the figure, his curiosity piqued. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for. Perhaps someone else traveling through the desert, or maybe a chance to find water or supplies. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer. It was a woman, riding a horse. The horse's strong gait made it clear that it was no ordinary animal, and it was carrying the woman with ease. The cowboy's heart skipped a beat. It was her! The Apache woman! But how could she have found him so quickly? The woman rode toward him without hesitation, her posture confident and steady despite the wounds she had endured earlier. She seemed almost otherworldly, the horse beneath her moving as if it were part of the desert itself. The cowboy could only stand there, unsure of what to do. As she drew closer, she stopped just a few feet away from him, her expression unreadable. She looked down at him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried the scent of the desert, and the silence between them was thick.
Why?
The cowboy asked, his voice rough from the dry air. He didn't know what else to say. He had given her his horse, expecting nothing in return, and now she was here with a magnificent horse of her own. It didn't make sense. The woman gazed at him for a long moment, her eyes softening as she dismounted from her horse. She stood tall and proud, her presence commanding in a way that was difficult for the cowboy to put into words. She wasn't just an Apache woman anymore. She was something more. Something powerful. "I have returned to repay you," she said simply, her voice calm yet full of purpose. She reached out and offered him the reins of the horse she had been riding. "This is a gift. You gave me your horse, and now I give you mine." The cowboy stood frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. The woman, Naya, as he had learned her name to be, was offering him a horse that seemed too fine to belong to anyone in the desert. It was sleek and strong, its coat shining even in the harsh sun. The cowboy knew that this was no ordinary horse. It was something special, something far beyond what he could have imagined. "But I can't take this!" he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "I gave you my horse. This is too much." Naya gave him a steady look, as if she had expected this reaction. "You saved my life," she said, her voice firm yet kind. "You gave me the chance to survive. Now I return the favor." The cowboy looked at the horse, then back at Naya. Her offer was genuine, but it still felt wrong. He had given his horse to help her, not to receive a gift in return. But as he looked at her, he understood. This wasn't just about the horse. It was about respect, a shared understanding of life and death, of survival in a harsh world. He took a step forward, his hands reaching out slowly to take the reins. The horse seemed to recognize him, its intelligent eyes meeting his with an almost knowing look. It was as if the horse knew what had transpired, knew that it was meant to be with him. "I don't know how to thank you," the cowboy said, his voice quiet with gratitude. Naya smiled softly, the expression warm but not fully revealing the depths of her thoughts. "You've already done enough. Your kindness has earned you this." The cowboy stood there for a long moment, simply holding the reins of the horse. The sun was still high in the sky, but for the first time since he had made his choice to help her, he felt a sense of peace. The weight of the desert seemed less heavy now. The journey was far from over, but with the horse at his side, he felt like he might have a chance. He nodded at Naya, his voice steady. "Thank you." And with that, she turned and mounted her own horse once more. The cowboy, now with a new companion, watched as she disappeared into the horizon once again. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that for now he was no longer alone. The desert had tested him, but it had also given him something he hadn't expected. A bond, a connection, and a new beginning. The cowboy looked at the horse, feeling its powerful presence beneath him. It was a magnificent animal, strong and steady, yet it moved with a grace that was unlike anything he had ever seen before. He stroked its mane gently, his fingers feeling the smoothness of its coat. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, but for the first time since his decision to give away his own horse, he felt something other than regret. The horse beneath him was more than just an animal. It was a symbol. A gift. A way for him to repay the woman, Naya, for saving his life. In a way, it felt like more than that. It felt like a new beginning, a second chance at something he hadn't even realized he had lost. As the cowboy guided the horse forward, he couldn't help but think of the woman,
of Naya.
She had come to him with such purpose, offering him the horse in return for the kindness he had shown her. But there was something else there, too. Something deeper. Something he couldn't quite place.
Her strength, her quiet wisdom. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his solitary life on the road. It had been a long time since he had met anyone who made him feel connected. The desert stretched out before him, endless and unforgiving. But now, it didn't feel so lonely.
He had always been a solitary man, preferring the company of his horse and the quiet of the wilderness. But something had shifted.
He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew he couldn't ignore it.
The night was falling quickly, and the temperature began to drop.
The cowboy had been on the move for hours, and he knew he needed to find shelter for the night before the cold became unbearable. He guided the horse toward a small outcropping of rocks in the distance, a natural shelter from the wind.
He knew he would need to rest, to recover from the exhausting day he had had. When he reached the rocks, he dismounted, taking the reins of the horse and leading it to a shaded spot. The horse seemed content, nibbling on some dry grass, its strong frame standing tall and alert. The cowboy made quick work of setting up a small campfire, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the stillness of the night. He sat down near the fire, his mind still racing. Thoughts of Naya, of the desert, of his decision to give up his only means of travel. It was all still fresh in his mind.
He had made a choice, a hard choice, but one that felt right. And now, here he was, alone again, but with a sense of purpose that had been missing for a long time.
As the fire flickered in front of him, the cowboy stared into the flames, watching the dancing orange light cast shadows across the rocks. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he had done the right thing.
He had helped someone when they needed it the most, and in return he had been given something unexpected, a horse, a companion, and a sense of hope. But as the warmth of the fire spread through his body, his thoughts turned back to Naya.
She had left him with more than just the horse. She had given him a glimpse into a world he had never fully understood, a world of connection, of people who respected the land, who valued the strength of others, and who were willing to help when it mattered most.
The cowboy had never really thought much about the ways of the Apache people. He had always been a wanderer, moving from place to place, living day by day.
He had never stayed in one place long enough to form any real connections, to learn about the people around him. But now, with the gift of the horse and the kindness of Naya, he was beginning to realize how much he had missed.
How much he had been missing all along.
As the fire burned low, the cowboy leaned back against a large rock, his eyes drifting closed. His thoughts began to slow, and the cool desert night began to settle around him. It was quiet here, peaceful, with only the sound of the wind rustling the dry leaves and the occasional crackle from the fire.
For the first time in a long time, the cowboy felt like he could relax. He could let his guard down even just for a little while. But sleep didn't come easily.
His mind was still occupied with the events of the day, the unexpected encounter with Naya, the decision to give up his horse, and now the weight of the horse he had been gifted. There was a part of him that couldn't help but wonder why she had given him the horse. It seemed too much, too grand a gesture for someone like him. The cowboy had lived a life of solitude, of quiet independence. He had never relied on anyone, and he had never expected anything in return for his actions. But now, with the horse at his side, he couldn't help but feel that something was different.
The world seemed a little less harsh, a little less cold. There was a new sense of purpose in his chest, a quiet fire that burned within him, urging him to move forward.
The next morning, the cowboy woke to the sound of birds calling in the distance, the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. He stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long day of travel. The fire had burned out during the night, leaving behind only a pile of ashes, but the cool desert air had given way to a warmer breeze. He packed up his things quickly, saddling the horse and preparing to continue his journey.
There was a new energy in him, a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't sure where he was going or what he would find along the way, but he knew that for the first time in a long time he wasn't alone.
As he rode, the cowboy thought back to Naya and the way she had looked at him. There was something unspoken between them, something that went beyond words.
The bond they shared wasn't just about helping each other in the desert. It was something deeper, something more fundamental. She had given him a gift, and in return, he had given her a chance at survival.
In a way, they were both changed by that moment. Both of them had given something, and both had received something unexpected in return.
The cowboy didn't know where this journey would lead, but he knew that he had made a choice that was worth more than anything he had ever experienced before. The desert, once a place of loneliness and hardship, had become something else. A place of new beginnings, of connections forged in the heat and dust. And with each passing mile, the cowboy knew that he was no longer just a man on the road. He was part of something larger now, something that extended beyond the desert, beyond the wilderness. He was part of a world where kindness mattered, where people helped each other, and where the bonds formed in the harshest of conditions could lead to something extraordinary. The cowboy continued his journey through the desert, the sun rising higher with each passing hour. The day was growing warmer, and the heat shimmered off the earth, creating waves of distortion in the air. He rode steadily on his new horse, feeling the strength beneath him, the animal's steady gait comforting in its rhythm. There was a sense of peace now, something he hadn't felt in a long time. His world, once full of endless stretches of loneliness, had changed in a way he couldn't fully explain. His thoughts wandered back to Naya. She had offered him the horse with such quiet confidence, and he had accepted it, still unsure of the depth of her gesture. There had been a moment when he almost hesitated, when he had wondered if he was making a mistake. But that moment had passed quickly, and now he felt the horse beneath him as a new companion, one that would carry him forward in this world that had seemed so vast and empty. As the cowboy rode, he began to notice the landscape around him changing. The dry, cracked earth of the desert was giving way to patches of green, small shrubs dotting the ground where the sand had once stretched endlessly. It was a subtle shift, but it was there, a sign that the land wasn't as unforgiving as it had first seemed. There were places of life, places where things could grow even in the harshness of the desert. The cowboy smiled faintly to himself. It had been a long time since he had paid attention to the small changes in the world around him. The desert had always seemed so vast, so endless, that he had forgotten there were pockets of life, small oases where things could thrive. He hadn't noticed it before, but now as he rode through the changing landscape, it seemed to open his eyes to something new. As he continued along the path, he came across a small creek, its water flowing gently over smooth rocks. The sound of the water was soothing, and the cowboy couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He dismounted and led the horse to the water's edge, letting it drink deeply. The cowboy himself knelt beside the creek, cupping his hands to take a drink. The cool water refreshed him, the sweetness of it surprising in such an arid place. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the simple pleasure of the coolness on his tongue. He sat by the creek for a while, letting the world around him settle into a peaceful silence. The air was calm, and the breeze carried the scent of the water in the desert. It was as though the world had slowed down for a brief moment, giving him time to rest and reflect. As the cowboy looked up, he saw something on the horizon. Movement. A figure in the distance. His hand instinctively reached for the rifle on his back, though he knew that it was unlikely to be trouble. It wasn't unusual to see other travelers in the desert, but he had learned to be cautious, always prepared for the unexpected. The figure was approaching steadily, and as it drew nearer, the cowboy saw that it was a man on horseback. He wasn't sure who the stranger was, but he had the air of someone who knew the land. The man's horse was a solid, strong creature, and the cowboy could tell from the way the stranger rode that he was experienced. As the man drew closer, he slowed his horse and came to a stop beside the cowboy. The stranger nodded in greeting, his face weathered by the sun, but his eyes sharp and alert. "Not many people around here," the stranger said, his voice rough but friendly. "What brings you out this way?"
The cowboy studied the man for a moment before responding.
"Just passing through,"
he said, keeping his tone casual.
"Been traveling a while. The desert's a hard place to get used to."
The stranger chuckled softly.
"Ain't that the truth? Been out here myself for some time. It's a lonely road, but it's got a way of teaching you things if you're willing to listen."
The cowboy nodded. He knew exactly what the stranger meant. The desert had a way of stripping away everything, leaving only the basics. Survival.
Willpower. Strength. In the desert, you had to learn quickly or you wouldn't last long. I see you've got a good horse there, the stranger said, his gaze shifting to the animal the cowboy was riding.
The cowboy looked down at the horse, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's a gift," he said simply.
"A woman I helped gave it to me."
The stranger raised an eyebrow. "A gift?"
"Not many people out here give away their horses, especially one like that." The cowboy shrugged. "She needed it more than I did." "You've got the right kind of heart, I can tell. Not many would make that kind of choice."
The cowboy didn't respond right away. He wasn't used to people commenting on his actions, let alone complimenting him for them. He was just a man on the road, trying to do what was right, even if it wasn't always easy. He had learned long ago that doing the right thing didn't always come with rewards.
Sometimes it just meant doing what you knew was necessary. "I'll be heading north," the stranger said, breaking the silence. "There's a town not far from here. If you're looking for supplies or a place to rest, it's a good stop." The cowboy considered the offer.
He wasn't sure if he wanted to stop in a town just yet. He had been alone for so long that the idea of joining a crowd, even for a short time, felt strange. But he couldn't ignore the fact that he was running low on supplies, and the journey ahead wasn't getting any easier.
"Maybe I'll take you up on that," the cowboy said, finally deciding. "I could use a place to rest."
The stranger smiled, then nudged his horse to continue.
"Follow me!"
"It's just a few hours north. You'll find what you need there." The cowboy mounted his own horse and followed the stranger. As they rode side by side, the cowboy couldn't help but notice how the landscape continued to change around them. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the desert. The air was cooling, and the shadows of the rocks grew longer, stretching out like fingers across the land. For the first time in a long while, the cowboy felt a sense of anticipation, a sense that the journey ahead held something more than just the road. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, one that had been growing in him since he had made the decision to help Naya. Something had shifted in him, and now as he rode alongside the stranger, he couldn't help but wonder what would come next. He wasn't sure where his journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't as concerned with the destination. The road, the people he met, and the experiences along the way, they were what mattered now. The cowboy had always been a man of the road, but he was beginning to understand that the road wasn't just about survival.
It was about the connections you made along the way, the people who crossed your path and changed your life in ways you couldn't have imagined.
As the sun dipped below the horizon, the cowboy rode on, his heart a little lighter than before, knowing that, with each new step, he was not as alone as he had once thought. The cowboy rode alongside the stranger for hours, the sun now fully setting and casting a warm golden hue over the desert landscape. The air was cooler now, and the silence between them was comfortable, filled only with the rhythmic sounds of their horses' hooves striking the ground. The landscape was changing again, from the dry, barren desert to something a little more welcoming, a few small patches of green visible in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of something different, something alive. As the evening deepened, the cowboy felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long time. He had always been a man of the desert, solitary, independent, and always on the move. But now, in this moment, surrounded by the changing land and the soft glow of the sunset, he felt something new. He wasn't alone, not really. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel a sense of peace. The stranger, who had introduced himself as Sam, didn't speak much, but the cowboy appreciated the quiet. There was something about Sam's steady presence that made him feel at ease.
Sam wasn't in a hurry. Didn't seem to have any place to be other than where he was. The cowboy admired that in him.
Maybe it was a way of life that he hadn't experienced before, but it was one that seemed to make sense. Maybe, just maybe, that's what the cowboy was looking for. People who understood the value of being still for a moment, of not rushing through life. The stars began to appear as the last light of the day faded. The desert at night was a completely different world, a world of endless stars, the cool air, and the distant sounds of night creatures stirring in the underbrush.
The cowboy had always enjoyed the night the quiet peace it brought. It was like the desert itself settled down to rest, as if everything in the world knew that the day was done. Sam led the way, guiding them toward the town he had mentioned earlier. As they approached, the first signs of civilization became visible. A few lights in the distance, the faint outline of buildings. The cowboy felt a mix of emotions. Part of him had been looking forward to the quiet solitude of the desert, but another part of him was ready for something different, something new. When they arrived at the town, it wasn't much. Just a small cluster of buildings, a few houses, a general store, and a saloon. It was the kind of place where people came to rest for a night or two, maybe resupply before continuing their journey. The cowboy could tell that not much happened here, but that was fine with him. He wasn't looking for excitement. He was looking for a place to breathe, a place to gather himself after so much time spent in the wilderness. Sam took the lead again, guiding the cowboy toward a small stable next to the saloon. The cowboy was grateful for the chance to rest the horse to give it the care it deserved after so much travel. They dismounted, and the cowboy rubbed the horse's neck affectionately, feeling the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. "Nice horse you've got there," Sam said, watching him. "Looks like it's treated you well." The cowboy nodded, patting the horse again. "It has. I didn't expect it, but I'm grateful for it. Feels good to have something strong at my side again." Sam smiled, his eyes kind and understanding. "Sometimes it's the unexpected things that change us, make us realize what we're missing." The cowboy met Sam's gaze for a moment, wondering if Sam was talking about more than just the horse. But before he could ask, Sam motioned toward the saloon. "You can stay at the inn here for the night. Get a good meal, a warm bed. It's not much, but it'll do. I'll be heading out first thing in the morning." The cowboy hesitated for a moment. He wasn't used to staying in one place for long, but tonight, something inside him told him to rest, to take a break from the endless road. He had given so much of himself to the desert, to his journey, that he had forgotten what it felt like to simply stop. To let himself be taken care of, even for just one night. "I'll take you up on that," the cowboy said, finally making up his mind. They walked toward the saloon together, and the cowboy couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. The town, though small and simple, offered a sense of comfort he hadn't realized he needed. The promise of a meal, a bed, and a chance to let the weight of the journey settle for a night was a welcome change. Inside the saloon, the warm light from oil lamps flickered, casting a golden glow over the room. The scent of cooked food filled the air, and the soft murmur of conversation buzzed in the background. The cowboy stood for a moment, taking in the simple scene before him. It was so different from the stillness of the desert, yet it felt just as real. He could feel the quiet hum of life around him, the small community of people who had found their way here, just like him. A man behind the bar looked up as they entered. He greeted Sam with a nod and turned to the cowboy. "Food? Drink?" the man asked, his voice friendly. "Food sounds good," the cowboy replied. "Whatever you've got." "Coming right up," the bartender said, disappearing into the kitchen. The cowboy found a seat at a small table by the window, looking out into the night. The stars were still shining brightly above, and the desert beyond the town stretched out endlessly. It was a peaceful sight, and for the first time in a long time, the cowboy allowed himself to enjoy it. Sam sat across from him, and they sat in comfortable silence as they waited for their meals. After a few moments, the bartender returned with a steaming plate of food for each of them. "Here you go," the bartender said, setting the plates down. "Enjoy!" The cowboy picked up his fork and took a bite. The food was simple but good, and it felt like a small luxury. After so many days of eating what he could find on the road, the warm meal felt like a gift. So what now?" Sam asked after a while, his voice casual but curious. The cowboy paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He thought about it for a moment, then smiled softly. "I don't know," he said, looking out the window at the stars. "Maybe I'll stay here for a while. Rest, get my bearings, see where the road takes me next."
Sam nodded as if he understood.
The road will still be there when you're ready, the cowboy smiled.
Yeah, it will be. But for the first time in a long while, the cowboy didn't feel like he was rushing.
He didn't feel like he had to keep moving forward, always looking for the next place, the next thing. For tonight, he could simply be. And that was enough.